Someone takes a week off because work has become exhausting. They sleep more. They stop checking email. They exercise. They spend time with people they care about. By the end of the week, they feel noticeably better. Then Monday arrives. By Tuesday afternoon, the same tightness is back. The inbox is full again. 3 priorities are all described as urgent. A role that was already too large has quietly acquired 2 more responsibilities. A supportive manager asks how things are going, but cannot remove any of the work. By Thursday, the person is staying late again, not because they forgot how to recover, but because the conditions that required recovery have returned. That pattern creates a difficult question. When work is draining someone, what exactly needs to change? The easiest answer is often the closest one. Sleep better. Exercise. Set firmer boundaries. Become more resilient. Learn to detach. Take a break. Those things can genuinely help. Recovery matters. Personal choices matter. Sometimes they are exactly the right place to intervene. But a useful intervention can still be aimed at the wrong level. If the same workload, staffing gap, conflicting priorities, low control, or lack of recovery time keeps regenerating the strain, then helping a person recover may reduce the damage without removing the mechanism that keeps creating it. The opposite mistake is just as tempting. It is easy to hear that sentence and jump to a different simplification. Burnout is the employer's fault. Demanding work is bad work, or every exhausted person is trapped in a broken system. The evidence does not justify that conclusion either. Some intense work is temporary, some is chosen, some is meaningful. Some people have real freedom to reduce their own commitments, but do not use it. Non-work pressures and personal patterns can matter too. So the useful question is not who is to blame. The useful question is what keeps recreating the strain, and who has the power to change that variable. That question gives both employees and managers a better way to think about burnout because it moves the conversation away from character judgments and toward leverage. There is an important boundary to establish first. Burnout has become a very broad word in everyday conversation. People use it to describe being tired, bored, overwhelmed, cynical, stressed, or simply done with something. But the World Health Organization uses the term much more narrowly. In its ICD-11 classification, burnout is described as an occupational phenomenon associated with chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It is not classified there as a medical condition, and the concept is specifically tied to work. That matters because a difficult week is not automatically burnout. Ordinary fatigue is not automatically burnout, and a workplace conversation should not pretend to diagnose a medical condition from a checklist or a feeling. The narrower definition actually makes the practical question more useful. If the concern is occupational strain, then the design of work belongs in the analysis. Not as the only explanation, but as one legitimate level of explanation. Work is not just a quantity of tasks. It is also a system of demands and resources. How much must be done? How quickly? With how many people? With how much control over sequence and method? How clear are the priorities? Can lower value work be removed when new work appears? Is support practical or mostly verbal? Is there a real chance to recover when the intense period ends? These variables matter because 2 people can face the same number of hours and experience very different forms of pressure. Imagine a product team approaching a launch. For 2 weeks, the workload becomes unusually heavy. Everyone knows why. The deadline is real. Non-essential work is paused. Temporary help is added. The team can make trade-offs. Some meetings disappear. The peak has a credible end date. After launch, the workload drops and time off is actually possible. That is high intensity. It may still be difficult. It may still require sleep, recovery, good boundaries, and careful management. But the structure contains an endpoint, a reason, some control, and a path back down. Now imagine a different team. For 6 months, each week has been described as unusually busy. New work arrives faster than old work is removed. Headcount stays the same. Priorities conflict. People are praised for being flexible, which in practice means using evenings to absorb whatever does not fit into the day. Everyone is still waiting for the temporary crunch to end. The surface experience can look similar in both cases. Long days, tired people, too much work. But the decision problem is different. In the first case, personal recovery may be proportionate, because the demand is genuinely bounded. In the second, recovery can become a repeating repair cycle around a load that never changes. This is where work design becomes more than a corporate phrase. It means looking at the conditions that shape how work is actually done. The World Health Organization's guidance on mental health at work identifies psychosocial risks such as excessive workloads or pace, understaffing, long or inflexible hours, low control over job design or workload, limited support, and unclear job roles. That list is broader than burnout alone, but it establishes something important. These are not merely private weaknesses inside an employee. They are legitimate features of the work environment to examine when work is harming mental health. Research on burnout also points in that direction, although the strength of evidence is not identical for every factor. A systematic review of prospective studies found comparatively stronger evidence connecting low job control and low workplace support with later emotional exhaustion. High demands and workload also showed associations, but the evidence was graded more cautiously. Reward, insecurity, and workplace fairness appear relevant too, but again, the evidence is not equally strong across every factor or every dimension of burnout. That wording matters. It is easy to say low control causes burnout or workload is the cause. That is cleaner than the evidence allows. Much of this research relies on people reporting both their work conditions and their symptoms. Association is not destiny. A risk factor is not a verdict. And the evidence is strongest for exhaustion, not equally strong for every aspect of burnout. Still, there is a useful pattern. Workload matters, but workload is not the whole story. Control matters because control changes what a person can do with the workload. Support matters because support can increase real capacity, improve prioritization, or help remove obstacles. Clarity matters because conflicting goals can make the same amount of work harder to execute. Staffing matters because a reasonable task list for 6 people may become an impossible task list for 4. Consider control for a moment. 2 professionals can each have 10 important tasks due this week. One can renegotiate deadlines, decide the sequence, cancel lower value work, and tell a client that one request must move. The other is told that all 10 tasks are urgent, all 10 deadlines are fixed, and nothing can be dropped. The number 10 is the same. The work is not. Control does not magically make an impossible workload sustainable, but low control removes ways of adapting. It turns pressure into constraint. The person is no longer only solving the work. They are solving it inside a narrower and narrower set of choices. Support has a similar complexity. A thoughtful manager who listens well can matter a great deal. Feeling respected and understood is not trivial. But emotional support and structural capacity are not the same thing. Imagine a manager who holds good one-to-one conversations, encourages people to take leave, and says sincerely that health comes first. At the same time, senior leadership keeps adding priorities without removing any. The manager has no authority over headcount, deadlines, or scope. That manager may be genuinely supportive. The team may still be structurally overloaded. This distinction is uncomfortable because it exposes a limit in many well-being conversations. Support is often discussed as if kindness and capacity were interchangeable. They are not. A kind manager can help someone carry too much. That does not mean too much has become the right amount. The same logic applies to recovery. Personal recovery is not a distraction from the topic. It is part of the evidence. A large meta-analysis of recovery experiences found that psychological detachment from work was associated with lower exhaustion and other negative outcomes. In plain language, being able to mentally leave work when work is over appears to matter. That fits ordinary experience. A weekend is different when work is not mentally present in every quiet moment. An evening is different when the phone is not constantly reopening unfinished problems. Time off is different when it is actually time off. But even here, care is needed. An association between detachment and lower exhaustion does not prove a simple causal story. The same research found smaller effects in designs that looked at people over shorter periods or around actual respite. Recovery helps, but the relationship is not a magic formula. Individual stress management interventions can help too. A Cochrane review in healthcare workers found that several individual level approaches may reduce stress, although the certainty of evidence was often low or very low, and long-term effects were less clear. So dismissing personal coping as fake or use would be a serious mistake. Better sleep, therapy, exercise, mindfulness, social support, clearer boundaries, and deliberate detachment can all be worthwhile, especially when the person has meaningful control over the behavior that is maintaining the strain. Picture an autonomous professional with considerable freedom over schedule and workload. The organization is not demanding 12 active commitments. The person keeps saying yes to 12 active commitments. They check work late at night, accept new projects before old ones are finished, and treat every opportunity as if declining it would be a failure. In that case, the most important lever may genuinely be personal. The workload is real, but it is partly self-created. Better recovery might help. More importantly, better decisions about commitments, boundaries, and detachment may reduce the load itself. A structural explanation would be too easy there. It could actually remove agency from someone who has useful choices. This is why the distinction between person and system should not become an ideology. A good diagnosis of the situation is not loyal to one side. It is loyal to the mechanism. What is producing the pressure? What is maintaining it? What changes it? That last question is especially revealing. What happens after sensible personal changes are tried? Suppose someone improves sleep, protects weekends, stops checking email after dinner, takes a real holiday, and returns with more energy. That improvement tells us recovery matters. It does not tell us that the original source of strain was personal. If the person comes back to the same impossible queue, the same role conflict, and the same staffing shortage, the benefit may disappear quickly. The recovery was real. The recurrence is also real. This difference between relief and removal is central. Pain relief can be valuable even when it does not remove the cause of pain. In the same way, a personal recovery practice can be genuinely helpful without being sufficient. The mistake is not using the recovery practice. The mistake is treating symptom improvement as proof that the surrounding conditions no longer need examination. The reverse mistake also exists. If a holiday does not fix the problem, that does not prove the organization caused it. A person may be dealing with health problems, caregiving pressure, financial stress, poor sleep, depression, anxiety, or a mix of work and non-work demands. Human beings do not arrive at work as sealed containers. And this is another reason to be careful with the word burnout. Burnout overlaps meaningfully with depression and anxiety in the research. The literature does not support casually declaring them identical, but it also does not support pretending they are completely separate. If exhaustion, loss of interest, sleep problems, or hopelessness are broad, severe, and present across life, rather than specifically around work, a workplace label may be too narrow. That kind of situation may warrant a broader professional assessment, rather than a self-diagnosis built from a work checklist. With those boundaries in place, there is a practical way to reason about recurring work strain without turning it into a medical test. Think of it as a sequence of questions, not a score, not a diagnosis, not a way to assign guilt, just a way to locate where the leverage may be. Start with time. Is this period of intensity actually bounded? That sounds simple, but workplaces are very good at using temporary language for permanent conditions. There is always a launch, quarter end, reorganization, hiring delay, client emergency, system migration, budget cycle, or strategic priority. Any one of those can be real. The important question is whether the intensity has a credible endpoint and whether workload truly falls when that endpoint arrives. If the answer is yes, a temporary peak may be exactly what it appears to be. People can choose intense periods. Teams can rally for a meaningful deadline. Difficult work is not automatically unhealthy work. If the answer is no, the temporary story deserves more scrutiny. A peak that never returns to baseline is not functioning as a peak anymore. Then look at recovery response. After evenings, weekends, or leave, does energy return? Can the person mentally detach? Does the improvement last for more than a few hours after re-entry? If ordinary recovery restores capacity and the work remains manageable afterward, that is useful information. It suggests that recovery itself is an important lever. If recovery works only until the person touches the system again, that is useful information too. It does not prove the system is the sole cause, but it raises the value of examining what is being reintroduced. Next, look at demand versus capacity. Can the expected work be completed in normal working time at a sustainable pace? This question is more powerful than asking whether people are busy. Almost every serious job includes busy periods. The issue is whether the expected output fits the available time, staffing, and attention with some reasonable margin for reality. What happens when new work arrives? Is something else removed? Are deadlines moved? Is scope reduced? Is help added? Or does every new priority simply sit on top of the existing ones? A system can hide overload for a long time when people privately compensate. They work evenings, skip breaks, switch tasks constantly, use weekends as overflow capacity, delay recovery. The organization sees the output and may conclude that the workload fits, but successful compensation can conceal an unsustainable design. This is one of the more important larger implications. A system can look efficient because individuals are absorbing its missing capacity invisibly. The work gets done, the calendar gets sacrificed, the backlog looks controlled. The cost appears later, inside attention, sleep, irritability, exhaustion, or withdrawal. That does not mean every extra hour is evidence of structural failure. Sometimes people choose to work longer because they care about the result. The signal is recurrence. If ordinary delivery depends on extraordinary compensation week after week, the compensation has become part of the operating model. Then examine control. Can priorities, sequence, deadlines, or methods be adjusted? Can lower value work be declined or renegotiated? Does the person or team have any authority over the variables that create pressure? Control matters because advice is only useful when someone has the power to act on it. Telling a person to set boundaries sounds practical, but what boundary is actually available if all deadlines are fixed, the role is understaffed, and declining work carries a real penalty? On the other hand, if a person can reduce commitments, negotiate scope, or stop volunteering for work that is not required, then personal boundary setting may have substantial leverage. The right question is not, do you have boundaries? It is, where are the real decision rights? Who can remove work? Who can move a deadline? Who can add staff? Who can change the sequence? Who can redefine the role? Who can stop a recurring meeting? Who can decide that one objective matters more than another? Sometimes the employee has that power. Sometimes the direct manager does. Sometimes the manager is only one layer below the real source of the load. The intervention must reach the level where the variable is controlled. After control, look at clarity and conflict. A workload can be reasonable on paper and exhausting in practice if priorities constantly collide. People lose time not only doing work but repeatedly deciding which supposedly urgent demand to disappoint. Role ambiguity creates another form of friction. If responsibility is unclear, work is duplicated, dropped, escalated, and recovered through more communication. The World Health Organization recognizes unclear roles among workplace psychosocial risks. That does not mean role clarity has one universal effect on burnout. It means chronic ambiguity deserves examination rather than being dismissed as a personality problem. Then consider support, fairness, and reward. Support should be practical enough to affect the problem. Can someone help with the workload? Can a manager make a trade-off? Can a colleague take part of the task? Can the issue be escalated to someone with authority? Fairness and reward matter too, although the evidence is more cautious than it is for control and support. Persistent mismatch between effort and recognition, or a sense that rules and opportunities are repeatedly unfair, can belong in the wider picture. But these are prompts for investigation, not proof that burnout has one cause. Then ask the recurrence question. What keeps bringing the strain back? This is where the framework becomes more than a wellness checklist. Suppose someone has made sensible personal changes. Sleep is better. Exercise is regular. Phone boundaries are stronger. Weekends are more protected. The person is not trying to be available every hour. Yet the same pattern keeps returning because the workload still exceeds capacity and priorities still conflict. The lesson is not that recovery failed. Recovery may be doing exactly what recovery can do. The lesson is that another level may also need to change. Now imagine the opposite. A person reduces late-night checking, starts declining optional commitments, protects one evening each week, and the strain falls substantially. The workload is still demanding, but it becomes manageable. That pattern points toward a different source of leverage. Neither example is a moral verdict. One does not prove that the organization is guilty. The other does not prove that the individual was weak. They simply show that different mechanisms require different interventions. This is why the popular debate between resilience and work redesign is often badly framed. The question sounds as if one side must win, but credible workplace guidance does not require that choice. The World Health Organization recommends both organizational approaches to reduce psychosocial risks and person-focused supports, including manager training, worker education, and individual interventions. The levels are complementary because problems can exist at more than one level. Evidence on organizational interventions is encouraging, but also humbling. A 2023 meta-analysis of controlled studies found that organizational and combined interventions could reduce exhaustion, but the overall evidence was judged very low quality because the studies were heterogeneous, the evidence base was small, and risk of bias remained. That is a useful corrective. Saying work conditions matter is not the same as saying organizational redesign has been proven to cure burnout. Organizations are complicated. Implementation matters. The right intervention depends on the actual problem. Reducing meeting load will not solve chronic understaffing. Adding staff will not necessarily solve impossible role conflict. A wellness allowance will not resolve a manager who cannot prioritize. More autonomy may help one role and create confusion in another. A good intervention has to match the maintaining mechanism. The same discipline applies to managers. A manager who hears the team is burned out may feel pressure to do something visible quickly. A workshop is visible. A resilience resource is visible. A day off is visible. Those options may help, and sometimes they are entirely appropriate. But before prescribing a personal solution, a manager can ask a more operational question. Can the work fit? Can the expected output be produced with the available people and time? Are priorities explicit? When a new priority is added, what is removed? Does the team have enough control to adapt? Is the problem local to one person? Or does the same pattern appear across several people exposed to the same workflow? That last signal requires care. If several people in the same system are struggling, shared conditions become more interesting to investigate. It still does not prove a single organizational cause, but it would be strange to examine only the private habits of each individual while ignoring the common environment. For an employee, the equivalent move is to make load visible. Chronic overload is easy to hide when conscientious people keep solving it privately. A person says yes to every request, then stays late to make the mathematics work. From outside, the system receives a dangerous message. Capacity is available. Making load visible can mean asking for explicit trade-offs. If this becomes the priority, which existing priority moves? If this deadline is fixed, what scope changes? If this responsibility is permanent, what part of the role is being removed? If the team is short-staffed, what output is no longer expected? These are not complaints disguised as questions. They are attempts to make the demand-capacity equation observable. They also protect against a common trap in high-performance cultures. Capable people are often rewarded for absorbing ambiguity. They rescue deadlines, smooth over staffing gaps, and keep systems functioning. The better they compensate, the less visible the design problem becomes. Again, this is not an argument against going the extra mile. There are moments when extraordinary effort is chosen and worth it. The risk is when extraordinary effort becomes the unspoken requirement for ordinary performance. There is another subtle point here. Work design is not the same as management quality. A good manager can exist inside a badly constrained system. A difficult manager can exist inside an otherwise reasonable workload. A team can have excellent relationships and still have too little capacity. Another team can have enough capacity but poor clarity. Reducing everything to good boss or bad boss loses the structure of the problem. The leverage question is more precise. Where is the decision made that keeps producing the strain? If the answer is the individual's own commitments, then individual behavior may be central. If the answer is team prioritization, the manager may have leverage. If the answer is headcount, budget, customer promises, or deadlines set several levels higher, then the direct manager may be unable to solve it alone. Locating the level does not guarantee that the level will change. Real organizations have constraints. Hospitals cannot remove every difficult demand. Emergency services cannot make every shift calm. Companies cannot always hire immediately. Customer demand, regulation, budgets, and crises can be real. But diagnosis of the system still matters even when the solution is limited. It prevents people from confusing lack of power with lack of understanding. Sometimes the best available response will still be personal protection inside an imperfect system. Better recovery, stronger limits, social support, therapy, or a decision to leave a role may be rational, even when the source of strain is partly structural. A person does not need to wait for an organization to become ideal before protecting health. And sometimes organizational changes will help without making the job easy. Better staffing, clearer priorities, more control, practical support, and real recovery time are not promises of a stress-free workplace. They are ways of changing the relationship between demands and resources. That distinction matters because the goal is not comfort at all times. Meaningful work can be difficult. Ambition can be tiring. Deadlines can demand concentration. Careers sometimes contain seasons of sacrifice. The question is whether the intensity is chosen, bounded, resourced, and recoverable, or whether the system quietly depends on people living above sustainable capacity. There is also a reason to separate demanding work from badly designed work. Some occupations contain demands that cannot simply be removed. A hospital cannot promise that every shift will be calm. Emergency responders cannot schedule crises for convenient hours. A small team may face a genuine short-term emergency that requires more from everyone than normal. In those cases, saying reduce the demands can be as unrealistic as saying be more resilient and ending the conversation there. The better question is what can be changed around an irreducible demand? Is staffing adequate for the expected exposure? Can shifts be designed to protect recovery? Can people rotate through the most intense responsibilities? Do they have enough control to make sensible decisions in the moment? Is support practical when the workload surges? Are recovery periods protected afterward? Or does the next peak begin before the previous one has ended? This matters because work design is not only about removing hard things, it is also about building enough resources around hard things that people are not asked to carry the full cost privately. The same distinction helps with ambition. A person may knowingly choose a difficult season because the goal matters. Building a company, completing a demanding qualification, managing a crisis, or delivering an important project can involve periods that are not sustainable forever and were never intended to be. That does not automatically make the choice irrational or the system abusive. But chosen intensity still benefits from honest accounting. Is the sacrifice actually temporary? Is the person choosing it or merely repeating the language of choice while facing consequences for refusing? Is there a plan for recovery afterward? Does the work return to a sustainable level? Or does each successful sprint become evidence that the next sprint can be even harder? Meaning can make difficult effort worth doing. Meaning does not create infinite capacity. Fairness and reward add another layer. Their evidence is not as strong as the evidence around control and support, so they should not become a universal explanation, but they can change how recurring effort is experienced. A difficult period may feel very different when people understand why it is necessary, see that the burden is shared reasonably, and receive recognition that matches the effort. The same workload may feel more corrosive when sacrifices appear permanent, arbitrary, or invisible. Again, that is not a diagnostic rule. It is a reason not to reduce workload to hours alone. Work is interpreted through control, clarity, reciprocity, support, and expectations. There is a practical managerial consequence here. When someone says they are exhausted, the conversation should not immediately jump to a solution. Take Friday off may be kind. Use the wellness benefit may be useful. Delegate more may be good advice. But each recommendation carries an assumption about the source of the problem. A better first move is to understand the pattern. What has changed? How long has it been happening? What does the workload look like in ordinary weeks? Which commitments are fixed and which are negotiable? What happens when new work is added? Is the person struggling with a load that others can manage, or is the same pressure visible across the team? What improves the situation and what brings it back? Only then does the intervention become more than a generic act of care. It becomes a response to a mechanism. For employees, the same principle can reduce self-blame without removing responsibility. Feeling overwhelmed does not automatically mean the workload is impossible, but it also does not automatically mean the answer is better personal discipline. Before turning strain into a judgment about character, look at the design of the week. How much work exists? How much time exists? Which choices are genuinely available? What would happen if the person stopped compensating privately? That last question can be revealing. If the work only appears manageable because someone consistently donates evenings, weekends, and recovery time, then the visible system and the real system are different. The visible system says the workload fits. The real system includes hidden labor and hidden recovery debt. Making that difference visible is not about dramatizing the situation. It is about giving decision makers accurate information. A system cannot adjust a capacity problem it cannot see. There is no validated simple test that can answer that question for every person and every job. The practical sequence here is a reasoning aid built from what the evidence suggests matters: time, recovery, demand and capacity, control, clarity, recurrence, and scope. It should not be used as a medical test or a responsibility scorecard. That limitation is not a weakness. It is what keeps the framework useful. Complex problems often become less solvable when they are forced into a binary label too early: personal problem or organizational problem, resilient or not resilient, good manager or bad manager, burned out or fine. A better approach is to keep asking what changes the pattern. Does rest restore capacity? Does the load actually fall after the peak? Can priorities be changed? Does more control help? Does practical support reduce the burden? Does the same strain recur when the same workflow returns? Is the distress tied mainly to work, or is it broad and severe across life? Each answer narrows the search for leverage. That is the deeper value of this way of thinking. It replaces moral language with operational language. Instead of asking why someone cannot handle the job, ask what the job currently requires and what resources exist to meet that requirement. Instead of assuming a resilience program is insulting, ask whether the problem it addresses is real and whether another problem is being left untouched. Instead of assuming organizational change is the answer, ask which organizational variable is actually maintaining the strain and whether changing it is feasible. Instead of treating recovery as proof that the person was the problem, recognize that recovery can help a person survive a condition without proving where that condition came from. And instead of treating recurring exhaustion as a private failure, make room for the possibility that the system is asking for more than the available capacity can sustainably provide. The strongest version of resilience is not endless tolerance. It is the ability to recover, adapt, make choices, and recognize when a problem sits outside the level one person can change. The strongest version of work design is not the promise of effortless work. It is the discipline of matching demands with resources, giving people meaningful control where possible, making priorities coherent, and allowing recovery to be real rather than theoretical. When pressure is temporary and meaningfully controllable, personal recovery and behavior may be the right lever. When the same workload, staffing gap, role conflict, low control, or lack of recovery opportunity keeps rebuilding the strain, personal coping may still help, but it cannot be the entire answer. The question worth carrying into the next difficult week is not who should be blamed for this. It is what keeps recreating this strain and what level actually has the power to change it.